Well, good evening once again. Day 92 of the Biden administration, which tonight finds itself part of a major movement, the push for police reform receiving renewed energy and impetus with help from the federal government. Less than 24 hours after a jury convicted former officer Derek Chauvin of murdering George Floyd. The feds are now scrutinizing the Minneapolis police force, which, of course, once employed Chauvin, and the three other officers, let's not forget, who are awaiting trial in George Floyd's murder.
The Justice Department has opened a civil investigation to determine whether the Minneapolis Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of unconstitutional or unlawful policing. Yesterday's verdict in the state criminal trial does not address potentially systemic policing issues in Minneapolis. Good officers do not want to work in systems that allow bad practices.
The investigation is going to focus on whether the department engages in excessive force and discriminatory conduct. It'll be led by the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, as well as the Justice Department's representative there, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota. This is on top of an already existing federal investigation into whether Derek Chauvin violated George Floyd's civil rights specifically. The new DOJ inquiry getting underway as Chauvin awaits sentencing in Minnesota's only maximum security prison. For obvious reasons, he is being held apart from other inmates. In the most secure unit there, he is reported to be held in isolation for 23 hours a day. Meanwhile, another fatal police shooting has sparked more anger, adding fuel to the controversy over use of force. Shortly before yesterday's verdict was announced in the Chauvin trial, a 16-year-old, Ma'Khia Bryant, was shot and killed by a Columbus, Ohio police officer who was responding to a 911 call. Authorities say Officer Nicholas Reardon fired as Bryant threatened two girls with a large knife. Today, Columbus police released more footage from the officer's body camera. And again here, a warning, the video is disturbing.
What's going on? Hey, what's going on? Hey, get down, get down, get down, get down. No, you ain't too long.
There is now an investigation underway, and the officer who fired the four shots is on administrative leave. Just this afternoon, the Columbus mayor and police chief talked about yesterday's shooting.
We believe that transparency with the public is the utmost priority during this difficult time. Bottom line, did Ma'Khia Bryant need to die yesterday? How did we get here? This is a failure on part of our community. Some are guilty, but all of us are responsible. It's a tragedy. There's no other way to say it. It's a 16-year-old girl. I'm a father. Her family is grieving. Regardless of the circumstances associated with this, a 16-year-old girl lost her life yesterday. I sure as hell wish it had happened.
Also tonight, a community in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, demanding police accountability now. Authorities say a deputy there shot and killed a man named Andrew Brown while attempting to serve him with a warrant. Brown's family is demanding police release video from that deputy's body camera. The White House says President Biden will bring up policing and racial justice during his address to a joint session of Congress next week. He's already made it clear he wants to see some sort of legislation, and fast. Now the pressure is on Congress to get something to his desk.
He believes the bar for convicting officers is far too high. It needs to be changed. He's a strong supporter, as he also conveyed passionately last night, of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. The president doesn't believe that he alone can pull the George Floyd Policing Act across the finish line. That is going to be up to Congress.
Counselor, I would like to begin with you, given your line of work, your scope of the history here. Did the Floyd verdict seem like a turning point at all to you?
First of all, good evening, Brian. Yes, absolutely. The Floyd verdict was a turning point, is a turning point in the history of this country, because it really is a small victory as relates to a door opening for policing reform. This verdict, the jury spoke loudly and clearly in rendering the verdict on all three counts. And that was a measure of justice for the Floyd family and for this country. Because after all, what we saw was 9 minutes and 29 seconds of a police officer, Derek Chauvin, killing, murdering brutally George Floyd. And that just really has to stop. So that was the tipping point. It's the beginning of a broader discussion of how we must have police reform. The vice president and the president last night addressed this. Members of Congress are addressing this. As you know, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act was introduced, put together, crafted primarily by members of the Congressional Black Caucus. The NBA is a partner of the Congressional Black Caucus. And this is the most comprehensive and broad and effective proposed law that we've ever seen in this country that would deal with all of the issues and all the problems that we see in policing today. Racial profiling, no-knock warrants, qualified immunity, the cameras, no chokeholds. If you look at just historically, all of the issues where there's excessive use of force with Black and brown communities, and if you did a list of all of the issues and what led to that, you would see that they're addressed in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. So absolutely the turning point. And now the Justice Department is doing a pattern and practice investigation to look at abuse and excessive use of force in the Minnesota Police Department. So without a question, that verdict has begun or started, just as George Floyd's killing did, a whole series of events that are designed to make this country better in terms of policing reform. So it's a wonderful thing.
Okay, Peter Baker, let's take what CK just said and apply it to your beat and to politics. This is from Politico. Following the Floyd verdict, nearly every Democrat at every level issued statements. This is in Congress, many of them heralding a step forward for racial justice. On the Republican side, nearly the opposite was true. Few lawmakers saw a need to weigh in at all. Peter, I don't need to tell you, it doesn't bode well for bipartisanship, for the Floyd Act, or for police reform at all.
Well, exactly. This has been a partisan issue since last summer, since President Trump decided to make the focus the occasional violence, the sporadic and sometimes tough violence that accompanied the peaceful protests after the George Floyd shooting, rather than focusing on the conduct of police officers, rather than focusing on the grievances of the many Black Americans who feel like they can't get fair treatment in the system today. And because that partisanship has so divided the country, the George Floyd Act has sat there for a year, nearly a year, basically unpassed. Now, there is some talk that there could be a breakthrough. Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina, Republican, has been in conversations with Karen Bass, the congresswoman from California, who's the lead author of that proposed legislation. There's some discussion that they could come to some sort of middle ground, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge for President Biden because, if he were to make the kind of concessions that he might need to make in order to get enough Republican support to pass it, that might be quite frustrating or disappointing to his own supporters who expect him to take more, dramatic and expansive action. And that's the conundrum we see with him in so many issues right now, but particularly sensitive on this one, because obviously the turmoil of last year was a key factor in his campaign last fall, and a key factor, I think, in his victory.
And Brittany, we were thinking of you yesterday when the verdict came down, and what I wouldn't give to see a graphic of your emotions over the past, say, 30 hours and 4 minutes since we learned the verdict. And I say it that way because, of course, there are two more controversial police-involved shootings, killings. What does it do to your level of encouragement or discouragement?
I'll be honest, as soon as the verdict was read, I had a set of mixed emotions. The only gratitude I had really was on behalf of George Floyd's family, who got a modicum, hopefully, of closure yesterday. But we have to be very clear about what it took to get here. It required multiple eyewitnesses, a 9-minute video, security camera footage from the convenience store, a global protest movement to get 12 jurors, 1 judge, and 1 attorney general to do the right thing one time. As far as I'm concerned, I don't find the same level of encouragement as some others have had about what this means systemically. The choice was very clear here for the jurors, in my opinion, but we have to stay focused on the system. It is easy to allow Derek Chauvin to be cast as the exception to the rule and as an aberration to policing instead of a product of this environment. I've been beating this drum for a long time for a reason, because when we look at the numbers, even when there is the rare conviction like we saw this week, when we look at the numbers, they do not decline, and those convictions do not serve as a deterrent. They didn't serve as a deterrent just up the road in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, when Daunte Wright was killed. It didn't serve as a deterrent when Ma'Khia Bryant was killed, or when the person was killed in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, just this evening. So we have to recognize that this has to remain a systemic question. And while people are necessarily putting pressure on Congress, we also have to remember that there are over 18,000 police departments across this country. Your mayor, your city council people, your police chief, and your police union are all having impact and making choices and decisions on what policing looks like in your community. So we have to make sure that we never let the system off the hook at the local, state, and federal level. I'm not satiated by a single verdict, and none of us should be.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.